Okay, in this video I'm just going to run through some of the option parts or aftermarket bits that we run on the Awesomatix A12 in the UK. None of this stuff is particularly expensive or complicated, it's just things that make the car run a bit more reliably, look a bit nicer, so it's kind of nice to have stuff really. I'll start from the front of the car, work towards the back. Hopefully I'll remember to cover everything. First of all, at the front here we've got a front bumper. This is made by MXLR, which is, for those that don't know, Max Mackler's aftermarket parts and hop-ups brand. So this is just a 3D printed plastic bumper, but it's actually looks really neat. It's good quality, fits nicely around the front of the chassis plate here, or front suspension plate. And you will find that this is more effective than the kit bumper. So the kit's supplied with a foam bumper, which is perfectly usable, but it is a bit softer, and you might find that underneath it sags down in the corners and touches the floor, particularly after you've had a few impacts with it. It will tend to flex down slightly. So this MXLR bumper's stiffer in the right places, and also helps to better support the body shell at the front here. Moving further back, I've done a separate video where I cover how we build the kingpin and front suspension arrangement, but you may have noticed just on the top of the servo plate here, rather than the kit specified button head screw, I've actually got a countersunk screw in a countersunk washer. So that basically just makes the diameter of that screw head slightly bigger and a little bit deeper as well. What that will do is, if you are driving the car and you have some steering lock on and you tap a board, the steering block has a tendency to lock inwards, and then if the spring's compressed, the block can ride up onto the top of this servo plate here. So what this larger screw head effectively does is prevent that from happening, so you won't get the steering lock up in a crash. This just means that you're not going to have to stop and need a marshal or have a mechanical issue with the car if you make a small mistake whilst you're on track. Servo saver. There's a multitude of choices where servo savers are concerned. We use the X-ray servo saver. Fits in the car perfectly, and you can also get, we've recently discovered, aluminium face plates for this servo saver. So they're made by Sagami RC. Geometrically they're the same as the X-ray plastic faceplate. They look a bit neater, and yeah, they're quite nicely made, so it's a bit of an aesthetic thing on the car. The reason we choose the X-ray servo saver here over some other brands is because the spring in it is pretty stiff, so it gives a nice direct steering feel on the car. If you have a servo saver that's got a spring in it that's very soft, you tend to find that whilst you might have a servo that can hold the torque generated in the steering assembly at high speed, if the spring's too soft, then you'll lose lock angle on the car if you're trying to go around a fast corner. So yeah, a nice stiff spring in the servo saver will give you a nice direct steering feel in the car, and we recommend the X-ray servo saver for that. If I flip the car over now, you can't actually see it from here, but in the rearward pivot here, we fit the SCS, so the Spherical Contact Shim pivot assembly. That's just really a kind of fit and forget item. It gives a more consistent feel in this pivot. It's close fitting, high quality, so it just means you won't have to rebuild or inspect or adjust this pivot quite so often. Do be mindful as well, if you run the SCS pivot here, you don't need to run the set screw that is in the hole next to it in the battery tray, so remove the set screw if you've got the SCS pivot here. Back onto the top side, you can see I've got some brass weights on the car. This is because as standard as it comes out the box, if you build the car with steel screws and fit typically used electronics into it, as you see I've got here, the car will be about 30 grams under the minimum weight of 730 grams. so you will need to add some weight. So this is a brass battery weight, just goes under the battery. It's made by Deadfly. I think this is the medium one, weighs about 8 or 9 grams. You can get one that's slightly heavier and also one that's lighter as well. You could make one of these battery weights out of any sheet of brass, have it whatever weight you want really. It's just a matter of personal preference. These Deadfly ones look pretty neat though, so, and also with the pocketing being at one end here, we can turn this through 180 degrees just to change the weight distribution in the battery tray a little bit. You can also see I've got some brass weights on the sides here. These are made by Centro, which is a brand that's marketed by CML Distribution in the UK. They're just flat brass plates with an M3 thread in it, so you can put a screw through from the underside of the chassis to hold those on. They look quite neat. The reason we use these over the Awesomatix cylindrical weights is because, particularly on the motor pod, or on the motor side of the pod, if you use the cylindrical Awesomatix weight, it will obscure access to the motor screw, so it will make it more difficult to adjust the spur and pinion mesh if you've got a tall weight on here. So we use kind of lower profile brass weights just to improve the access here. If you can't get these Centro ones, there's many other brands and types you can buy. I've seen that RC Maker make some neat looking ones, so they could be worth investigating and trying. If you need to add even more weight than that to the car, there are holes at the back of the pod here where you can adjust the Awesomatix cylindrical, attach the Awesomatix cylindrical weights. So you can have 5 grams on each side of the pod just under the axle here. So that's really if you want to get even more weight further back in the car. And the only other thing to mention really is you can see I've got some titanium screws in place of the kit steel ones holding the wings on here. That's really just an aesthetic thing, and it does get a little bit of weight out the car, but let's face it, you're going to have to add it back on somewhere. So yeah, they're really just for looks rather than function, to be honest. And I think that's about it. Everything else on the car is built as it's supplied in the kit.